All right, hello everybody. We are back. We are back from our 2-month-long hellish hiatus. I'm sorry that our one listener had to miss out on, an episode or two that he was waiting for. But yes, we're here. It's your co-host Mike L, and as always, I'm joined by Adamantium, and of course, Nice Man.
Who ironically is never nice.
Okay. We have yet to see your bad side, but whatever. Okay. So anyway, today we are reviewing another Garth Ennis classic comic that I'd never really heard of this one before we reviewed it for this episode. What about you guys?
Since I have an issue of Crisis downstairs in the basement, I guess I have.
Okay.
I remember nothing about it.
Okay. So yeah, this is basically 4 stories. It's kind of an anthology, right? It's called Suburban Hell, but there's no connection between these 4 stories, right? It's kind of just, there's a common theme. And we're going to go through these really quickly. It won't take us too long, but we're also going to make it count because we know that our listeners have been waiting for us, right? So we're going to start off with, first we have this classic cover here. Does anyone know who did this cover here?
I want to say I do, but I'm not sure that I do.
Well, we refuse to do research.
Crisis number 36.
Yes. And I could go to Google, but I don't want to screw up my screen because it's recording right now. But it's Crisis number 36, and this is not Crisis on Infinite Earths. This is Crisis from the UK. And did you collect this when you were a kid, Paul?
No. It was intriguing, but then again, I never collected 2000 AD either. Okay. But I did collect Warrior.
Nice.
I mean, when you begin with...
I was about to say much better, but yes.
Well, when you begin with Alan Moore,
right.
Marvel Man, and V for Vendetta, how can you not? And then Crisis came after that, I think. And I thought it was intriguing. I wonder what they're trying to do, really. What are they trying to do? How is it going to be different from Warrior? And I looked at a few, and as you know, I've got an issue downstairs. I never really got into it though.
I have got.
I was going to say something. Oh, I'm sorry, Mike.
I was going to say quickly. I've got some original issues of Warrior, and they're like the Holy Grail to me. But anyway, Adam, what were you going to say?
Yeah, my apologies. Not to be an over talker. Someone did bring up. Actually, I think it was you, Mike, about who the cover artist was. That's Glenn Fabry.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Which is a good Maltese name.
Very, very much so. And in terms of the ethos of this, I think Crisis was an anthology series, but unlike Warrior, they tried to focus more on, I guess you could say, kitchen sink realism or more social commentary in their works, eschewing a lot of the more fantastical sci-fi of what would happen in Warrior. I think it was basically 2000 AD's imprint on realist comics, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think 2000 AD trying to compete with Warrior.
Well, anyway, so now we're going to talk about this first story, which is called "The Unusual Obsession of Mrs. Orton." And I can't remember who we finalized who's going to talk about what. But between Paul and Adam, who would like to talk about this one?
I guess we can all talk about it.
Sure, just to summarize.
I mean, it's fine. But, yeah. Well, there's a woman who has a husband, and they have a grown-up son or a teenage son. He can't be too young. And the parents seem rather middle-aged, and she's obsessed with a dog turd that she sees in her driveway. And it's not just any old dog turd. It's there every day, apparently. The same size, the same shape, the same position. And, it's completely understandable that she would become obsessive about it. I mean, who wouldn't? But this obsession drives extreme wedges between her and her son, and then later her and her husband, because as with any obsession, you fixate on that to the detriment of anyone and everything else. So there she is, day after day after day, at the window. And the son eventually can't take it anymore, and he leaves. And that's not just a wedge between him and his mother, but also between him and his father, because the father thinks that he's abandoning the mother in her time of need, because obviously she's having some kind of is it fair to say medical issue or something, psychological issue?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, who can blame? Who can blame him in this case? And then later on, the husband is begging the wife to pull back from her obsession, and eventually she's alone at the window day after day after day after day. But she's not at her window day after day after day. She's in an insane asylum, looking out of the glass of the door to her cell, really what amounts to her cell. Because then we realize that she's obsessed her way into a padded cell, so to speak. But then, with this story, how do you want to take it? If you want to take it literally, it's a really depressing story, and not the kind I want to read. Absolutely not. I almost felt like Grant Morrison when he criticized, one of the things he criticized about Alan Moore's writing was that he says he doesn't want to read comic books to re-enter the world he's already in. He wants to enter a world that doesn't exist. And I felt a bit like that reading this. That was my immediate reaction, and very subjective reaction. Objectively, I mean, you can say, well, this represents any and all obsessions, where it can lead, how it can affect relationships, where it leads you, how all obsessions and addictions are completely unhealthy. And in this case, it happens to be about some dog crap. But is it really about this? So in the end, Garth Ennis, good writer. It works on different levels. But did I enjoy it? On a scale of 0 to 10? 0.
Go. Okay. Adam, what's your first impression of the story?
Well, I think thematically this is very appropriate because I do think the story is dog shit. I was not a fan of this.
Interesting. Okay.
I felt there was nothing to it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt it was a means to kind of exploit this idea of the suburban complacency with this mother who would just have this extreme fascination over this disorder in her perfectly ordered home. And certainly you can make a commentary about that sort of facile aspect of suburban life, but it was just a parade of cruelty that didn't really end with anything clever or profound. It was just ending with a sequence in which we see the person walking the dog, which lays its load down onto the sidewalk, and then they walk away. And the irony is the person's completely oblivious to letting their dog do this on this person's sidewalk and the ramifications it's having in this other person's life. And I'm left thinking, so what? I didn't really get it in terms of, I don't want to say I didn't get it, because I think that's kind of a cop-out when people say that. I get it. I just don't think it was good, what I got. And compounded by art that, I'm going to say something that might be polarizing, I found to be a bit ugly. I did not care for it.
Okay, yeah, no, the art, I didn't like the art either, but here's the thing. First of all, I thought the story was great. I'll start why. I'll explain why. Because I know this person, and she's in my family, extended family. But I know a person who obsesses over what their neighbors are doing, and she watches her neighbors. And when someone parks their car in the wrong spot, she calls the police. And when someone puts their garbage in the front of the driveway instead of the back of the driveway, she calls the city. And when someone doesn't cut their lawn, she calls the city. And that's what this woman is parodying, is satirizing someone who has nothing better to do than to sit and stare out their window and obsess over something as, minuscule as dog shit on their driveway. And I'm not sure what you said about the ending, Paul, but as far as your interpretation of the ending, Adam, I think it's clear that the idea is supposed to be that this woman believes that this was intentional, and the twist ending is that it is. That's why the guy says, "You're nice one, mate. You're a good dog, aren't you? You're a good dog," and then he laughs. So I think the idea is that this guy is purposely training his dog to shit on her driveway, which is ironic because there are people that believe that, and obviously we think they're all crazy, but in this story, they're actually right. And it drives her to the insane asylum. Her belief,
to a degree, it never actually points out the fact that he knows what his actions are doing. He might think he's just being a subversive, that he's just pulling a trick on somebody in the neighborhood, but it doesn't necessarily.
I think we bored Paul. He's out. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Paul's checking what's happening on his driveway.
Yeah.
Sorry, man. My whole thing is, I think there is an idea behind the story I really like. Because I think this is the issue I had. I agree that I think the story that you are seeing here is very fascinating. Seeing this person so obsessed with the goings on about their neighborhood and about everything in their surrounding life. That is very intriguing to me. I just don't see enough of it happening within this narrative. I wish it was more fleshed out. I wish I had a greater sense of how this woman's preoccupations or obsessions really impacted her family, but I just see this one facet of her life doing that. And I just feel it felt a bit rote. Not to mention the fact, you've heard my opinions about Ennis in the past, and I don't really see this flying in the face of anything I've said about him prior. I think this is a lot of attempt at shock for shock's sake. That doesn't really do anything much more than that. I like the idea of the story, but I don't like how it's executed, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
So, Mike, can I say?
Sure.
You said about the person you know in the extended family.
Sure.
And that's why it resonated with you. And from everything you said, I think that's completely understandable. But when you were saying that, that took me back to the Grant Morrison, Alan Moore little debate, which wasn't a debate. And that is, again, this is so real that it's depressing.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I'll agree that I don't want to read superhero comics that are too close to reality. But as far as a comic book itself, the medium, I mean, I like Harvey Picard stories.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that. I like, a little bit of Robert Crumb, a little bit of Art Spiegelman, so.
And I've always loved Love and Rockets.
Which I've not read much of, but yeah, I've read some. And yeah, I mean, so I don't think that being, dealing with kitchen sink realism is in itself bad at all. And I don't think it's depressing. I mean, this is not something I would read over and over again, but I certainly enjoy it as a story. Absolutely.
I'm just going to make one aside here, because you brought up Spiegelman, you brought up Picard, which are two of my favorite graphic novel writers. Mm-hmm. I think there's a huge difference between what they do in their works and what I see here in these short stories, which is mainly there's a lot of information presented. There's a lot of story. There's a lot of textual elements. So there's a lot to digest intellectually in those writings. And they're very much offset by humor. I mean, despite the gravity of a story like Moss, there is still a lot of humor and a lot of irony being used within that story. And I think, to Nice Man's point, it isn't just entrenching me in a feel bad, it's punching me down way. It has those moments of heaviness, but there's enough moments that lift me up that I feel it creates a sort of balance. And in fact, sometimes, especially with Moss, I find when I have those moments that lift me up, it makes the more profound, gut-wrenching moments even more impactful. I feel when you keep hitting somebody in the arm, eventually it gets numb. Mm-hmm. If you want it to really lay a blow, you punch it, you stop for a little bit, hit another place, and that's how you go on. This is me being punched into the arm and just going, stop it, stop it, stop it. But I might change my opinion on the next story. Who knows?
Okay, then let's jump to the next story because we've got 3 more to talk about. So we're going to jump.
Just one last thing.
Oh, one last thing from Paul.
I really hope that tomorrow we don't look out front and find dog crap in our front yard.
Right.
It's not from a dog.
Okay, the next one from Crisis number 43. This is The Ballad of Andrew Brown. Is that right? Yeah, okay. Now we scheduled this episode and rescheduled it many, many times. I read these 2 the first time we scheduled this episode. So and then I read the last 2 much more recently. So this one I'm the least familiar with. So Adam, did you read this one?
I did. I think this is the capper of the great poop duology that Ennis wrote. So I'll just go forward with this one.
Sure.
And may I say, it is not a ballad. It's a limerick all the way through.
Okay.
Minor nitpick, but it is done in rhyming sequences. And it talks about this really well-to-do young man named Andrew Brown, who is your basic typical jock. He's good looking. He's sporty. The girls have fascination with him. But all this comes to a head at one point and comes crashing down when he's suddenly besought with a wrenching urge to defecate. I don't know if he had Taco Bell beforehand, whatever happened, but that's where we end up going. And he ends up expelling his waste because he has no other recourse because all the other bathroom facilities are in use, not inside the toilet proper, inside the area, but he goes where? Well, he does it right on the floor. Right on the floor of the loo inside the boys' facility in the school he's part of. A teacher comes in, and the detail escapes me. He might be the headmaster. No, in fact, he is. And there's a very disgusting sequence, and my apologies for anyone who is attempting to eat during this, but he slips and falls directly into said feces.
Yeah.
Well, then there, of course, is a big brouhaha. The headmaster has an assembly where he's trying to call out and understand what student did this. Is this a big, let's say a joke at his expense? Well, Andrew Brown is there in the audience, and he's kind of reveling at the discord this is causing, and he's having these fantasies of grandeur about how he's basically been this hellion, and he's upkept this great routine of his stature in the school, while at the same time avoiding blame. No one expects him to have expelled himself onto the floor. Why would anyone suspect Andrew Brown to have done this? But the pressure is on, and I'll give this story this little kernel of credit. The pressure he feels in his bowels is parallel to the pressure he's feeling throughout the rest of the story, where he's feeling this pressure of hiding what he did, because he has not divulged it, he's not told anyone, and yet he still constantly looks at the bathroom and he just thinks, do they know? Can I admit it? He eventually just becomes overwhelmed with paranoia to the fact that when he hears people laugh in the hallways or exchange little jokes that they think they're laughing at his expense, and it gets to a point where he just cracks. He just loses his mind in the middle of school, and he confesses what he did, that it was him that laid the wayward feces in the middle of the boys' loo. And that leads to a huge, huge cascade of events thereafter. He's expelled from school. His parents yell at him and kick him out. He runs away, and he's so aghast with what happened and this failure that he's had from this huge success, this pinnacle he was on, to the state of disregard and lacking dignity that he has now, that he self-immolates himself. And that's where the story ends.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it with Mike.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm just going to say, here's the thing about Garth Ennis. I started with my impression of Garth Ennis being this type of story, and then I grew to really like him. This is an example of what I used to hate about him, which was just the shock for shock's sake, right? And all that thing, and all that type of thing. However, now that I've read so much more of his work, in that context, I can see, I mean, he is still a skilled writer, but it's like the starting point for this is still something I would never, if I had to choose, I would never start a story with this premise. But knowing that, I still think because of his skill, he did it better than most people could. But I'm going to go back to what Nice Man said about not wanting to read the type of story that the first one was. This is not the type of story that I would usually like to read. I'll put it that way. But I still think it was well executed. Nice Man, what do you think?
I think that it was ambitious.
Okay.
If we take away the, the what can we say? Some of the more lurid details.
Sure.
And this shock for shock's sake, well, that's something that I always associate with Mark Miller.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Mark Miller is useless. And because he actually takes his stuff seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So when he does shock for just shock's sake, I mean, for me, he's just masquerading as a writer, with sensationalism as a crutch. With Garth Ennis, there's always a point to it.
Yes.
And that's why I think this is ambitiously done, whether technically it's a ballad or not. But that's an interesting title, The Ballad of, and then told in rhyme. I think that's good. And so I give it points for its ambition. My favorite panel is the one where there's a group of boys and they're having a great laugh. They're reading Viz. Do you see that panel? Do you remember that panel? They're reading Viz magazine, which, it started in a bedroom in Newcastle or thereabouts. And before too many years had gone by, it was the second highest selling publication in Britain. And I used to read it, and I would laugh and laugh so much. So I appreciate seeing a panel where there's a group of boys reading Viz and laughing the way I used to laugh. Now, Viz was full of crude humor. And maybe there's some connection here that Garth Ennis is making between that and his more serious story here, because Viz is comedy, just out and out comedy. But in the end, do I want to see somebody crapping on a floor and somebody else slipping into it? No. But otherwise, it has a good ambition, I think.
One hilarious observation I've made, Paul, as I never have any idea how your sentence is going to end until you get to the last word. So when you said, I find this story ambitious, I had no idea what you were going to say. You were going to say crap. You were going to say this is a 0 out of 10. I have no idea ever. So I'll give you that. Okay. By the way, one quick note about Mark Miller. Has anyone read his Superman adventures?
No.
Oh, they're actually good.
That's very surprising.
One day I may read something by Mark Miller and say if it's good, I'll say it's good.
Yeah, let's check it out. I mean, the vibe. It's Superman. It's the animated series. But yeah, if you're into that, definitely check it out. But anyway, okay.
Based off of the 1990s animated,
yes.
I will check that out just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
I just want to add one final point before we revert to the next story, which is I know I came across as very negative and maybe a little bit critical of this. I was pleasantly surprised by the end of the story, even though I felt the ending was a bit nonsensical. I appreciated that about it. Mm-hmm. I appreciated that this seemingly random bodily function, which should not impact anyone's life so much to the point where they self-immolate, decided in the course of the story that this would be their downfall, that this thing that this person who's on this pedestal, who's seen as infallible, who's seen as perfect, when he had this accident, that's the thing that caused his esteem to lower so much that he had no recourse but to burn himself. I think there's something to that. And I think maybe this is one of those points where I do get where Ennis is lauded as a good writer, because I see there's a type of social commentary and irony in this seemingly, I don't want to say innocuous, but fairly mundane activity leading to the downfall of this person. I think there is something there. I still don't care for the artwork in this particular story. Maybe the same artist, I believe. Or at least it has to be the same colorist. But yeah, I have to say, I did enjoy this more. In fact, I would say this achieved more of what I wish the first story had achieved. I agreed with you. I think the overarching intent of that story was fair, but I think this one actually pulled it off a little bit more, even though it wasn't a ballad.
Okay. All right, so on that note, now we're going to jump to our third story, which is from Crisis number 61, and this is called Light Me. And I'll do this one. So this is about basically a couch potato, a guy who's sitting and just kind of rotting away, watching TV, drinking beer, getting overweight, and he's narrating the story as he's going, complaining about the TV rotting the country's mind, just criticizing everything he's seeing. He's flashing back to when he was in the war in Vietnam. And he's just kind of like disillusioned with everything, right? And basically, he flashes back to a time when John Wayne visited his platoon during the war. And it's clear that he idolized John Wayne. He looked up to him. It was, this big deal for him to be there. John Wayne came and he gave a lighter, and he still has the lighter, so it's cutting back and forth, and we're seeing, that he still kind of worships this guy. And basically, then he, I hope I can remember what happens here. But oh geez. I can't. I do remember how it ends, but I can't remember exactly what sets him off. Does anyone else remember? He pulls like a Travis Bickle, and he's going to start busting heads, but I can't remember why.
It's just basically the reflection of everything that happened with him and John Wayne. Like, he had this idea after this recollection of, despite everything that's been done, think about what happened to me and all my people in my troop. Like, he thinks about those who have wasted their lives, those who have succumbed to drug addiction. And it's just, like you said, he's having a taxi driver tackle, Travis Bickle sort of mentality, where he's going to take a shotgun and he's going to, clean the scum off the earth.
Right. But then what ends up happening is, it's a little bit sudden, but I think it's funny. So what happens is he's sitting there and he's basically giving not his manifesto, but he's kind of narrating what's he going to do. But then all of a sudden he gets distracted and he looks over and he starts commenting on what he's been complaining about on the TV. And he's like, wait a minute. There's that stupid soap the bitch watches. What a pile of shit. Jesus, people watch this stuff. Hey, hold on. That blonde guy, I thought he was supposed to be going out with the nurse. So what's he doing with the secretary? Hey, wait, sorry. I'm just trying to read this here. If I can figure out how to control this. Hey, when's this on tomorrow? Better check the listings. Maybe take another day off work to see it even. Snuffed out. The end. And that's it. And you could say that the ending is a little bit sudden and a little bit of left field, but I think I personally think this is a great commentary on how the old saying about, what is it? Beer and football and gambling is kind of what keeps the masses at bay. I believe it was Aldous Huxley that said something like that, right? Something like that. And I might be mixing up 2 or 3 different people, but I do like the message of the story, even if the ending is a little bit out of nowhere. Maybe it could have been hinted at a little bit that this could happen, but I do like the overall message of this. And Paul, I'll jump to you because you haven't said anything in a while.
Probably good. I think Garth Ennis is a good writer who got better and better
Okay.
as he got older. I think Garth Ennis's Punisher is absolutely head and shoulders
Yes.
way above any other iteration of the Punisher. No matter who did it, no one matches Garth Ennis because he hits exactly the right tone. And I've got issues of especially Punisher War Journal, which sounds like a really boring title, and that was such a great 6-issue series. The kind that I would never part with. That's for sure. So this is good. I mean, it's good, and I've said in the past.
See, I didn't know where you were going with that, but anyway, go ahead.
Because, on the one hand, it's very depressing.
Mm-hmm.
It's so depressing that you feel like you would want to do that to yourself after reading this story. But if something is well written, then ultimately it's not depressing.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's well written. Depressing is when something is badly written. That's depressing.
Mm-hmm.
But Garth Ennis is a good writer, and this is even in his much younger days.
Mm-hmm.
So objectively, it's good. No doubt about it. It's good. Subjectively, do I want to read it? No.
Okay. That's a nice roundabout way of saying it's crap. Okay. No.
No.
You just don't want to read it. Okay. So Adam, what's your take on this one?
Well, first off, I'm going to bring up something that I'm surprised we hadn't talked about, which is that this story is set within the same universe as Preacher.
Huh?
Because the lighter that he receives has that embossed saying on it that all the soldiers receive. I believe the title character in Preacher received during his own stint in Vietnam.
See, I've only read the first trade, and that was 10 years ago, so I don't remember.
Honestly, I mainly know that because of the references made in Why the Last Man more than reading Preacher. But regardless, yeah, so I found that to be kind of interesting because tonally, in terms of the sense of humor, it did remind me a lot of Preacher, that very, very ironic and very dark irony, I should say, suffused throughout the story. And it's all about basically the mollifying aspects of entertainment. You had this person who is a war vet, has been disillusioned over what happened post-Vietnam to him and to all of the people that survived from his troop. And yet, why did he enter? What was this emboldening thing that he had? Well, he wanted to be a soldier. He admired John Wayne. He wanted the Duke to be there because he fetishized that aspect through this figure of entertainment. And what happens in the end? Well, rather than take any action, even though it would have been a deplorable action, he, again, is mollified by entertainment. Mm-hmm. And I think there is something oddly interesting about that. I don't think the execution is fully excellent in this one.
Right.
But of everything that's going to be discussed today, I think this is the greatest merit of any of these stories because of what it touches upon, which is that aspect where, as you said, in Aldous Huxley sort of way, it talks about how anesthetizing that entertainment can be. And I find that very fascinating. You think, in a way, the story is going to eventually lead to this sort of social commentary about the state of what happens to veterans in war, but it takes a quick pivot and instead becomes a critique about the entertainment complex and industry. And I find that to be very fascinating, very subtle, a range of subtlety I'm not used to having from Ennis. So I, again, was very fascinated by that. Once more, I really dislike the art. I found the art to be very repugnant for the most part. There is this type of painted aspect for all of these stories, which I don't really care for. Maybe it's these very fleshy brown colors that are used for it. There's this kind of mixture between almost attempts at hyper-realism in the art and yet hyper-musculature, which ends up everything looks a little bit exaggerated to the point of parody, but a dark parody. But I just feel it looks ugly. At least with this one, I think the shadowing and shading, it hid some of the defects in the art that I didn't care for in the previous story. So I think it looks the best of all the stories we're going to talk about today. And And I will say, if there's one story for the listeners to actually seek out and read after this whole episode, for me, it's going to be this one.
Interesting. Yeah, I would say I might agree with that. Yeah, this one is it's not perfect, but I think it's the most I guess you could say profound. It has the germ of the most profound idea, put it that way. Now we're going to talk about crisis number 62, and the story is Charlie Lives with Fang and Snuggles. Who would like to summarize this one?
Maybe we can share in the summarizing.
Sure, okay.
Maybe just lead off with various comments.
Sure. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Well, at first when I read this, I had the usual reaction, like, I don't want to read this. But then I finally realized by the end that it's a comedy.
Wow.
And it's a dark comedy, and the art reflects that as well. So if you like dark comedy, and usually I do, then I think, it's okay. But maybe I just wasn't in the mood to see severed dogs' heads and ripped open bunnies and things like that.
Okay, let's just quickly summarize the story. What happens here? So this guy, is he house sitting? Yeah, he's house sitting at a house, and there's a dog in the backyard, and he's talking with the dog, and basically he looks out the window and he sees that the dog has, according to what he can tell, has attacked and killed this family's pet rabbit.
Yes.
And so he's freaking out. He's like, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? I can't let the family know that this happened. So he tries to cover it up. This is so grotesque. By taking this rabbit, washing it off, and then sewing it up and putting it into its cage. Okay? Then he waits for the family to get... Then the next thing that happens is he then he hears the dog wrestling around with the cage again. So the dog is still going after this rabbit, even after the dog has supposedly killed the rabbit. So then he goes into the garage, and he's kind of having it out with this dog, and the dog's barking at him and growling. So then he pulls out a chainsaw, and he hoists it up in the air, and he's supposedly going to attack the dog. But as this is happening, he's also narrating how difficult it is to control a chainsaw, right? And he's talking about how the kickback, when you actually start cutting something, it can push you back and blah blah blah. And so just as he's narrating that, he accidentally hits against the back of the car. Then the chainsaw comes back and hits him in the face and cuts him in the head, right? And Adam, if you want to jump in, you can jump in.
Yeah, so just basically from that point, he does manage to lacerate his face, so it's a pretty bad injury. But he continues berating the dog, and there's a sequence in which we just pan out to the exterior of this garage in which this is happening, and we see blood splattering over the window. We can use our imaginations to figure out what goes on from there, but the subsequent scenes are blood splattered all throughout the walls of the said garage, as this character has bandaged up his face with this makeshift sort of bandage, and then he's just trying his best to clean up the blood and the viscera from all over this area. And he ends up getting a call from the family whose home he's dog sitting, house sitting for. And during the course of this, he's making up some excuses. He's saying, oh, by the way, your rabbit died when I just thought you should know. And they go, oh, we know. The rabbit died before you took over house sitting for us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we buried him in the backyard, thus revealing that the dog had actually just dug up the already deceased rabbit.
Mm-hmm. And then I'll
leave it over to a nice man to finish off the paper.
Yeah, nice man.
So then, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to say, yeah, nice man, you can wrap it up.
So then, of course, I say of course, when the family arrive home and they have a young daughter, the young daughter is freaked out because she sees the dead rabbit back in its cage, which is quite funny. I think that's the funniest thing, is you can just picture the girl back, coming in. Oh, what the hell? The rabbit's back in the cage. Yes, it is cleaned up and stitched up, but still very dead. And so then where must the house sitter be, and where must the dog be? Well, then we're treated to the final scene where the house sitter guy is in the garage. He's got his mouth wrapped around the car exhaust. And the dog is also there under the car, I think, with a severed head.
See, it is funny, isn't it?
Kim is just telling me that the moral to this story is the truth will set you free. Did you hear that?
No, what'd you say?
He should have. What do you say? Shouldn't have lied about it. Shouldn't have lied about it, and shouldn't have tried to cover it up. Should have just simply said, "Sorry, your dog killed your rabbit." And then they could have said, "Well, no, he already killed the rabbit beforehand." Yeah, I guess so. So if there's a moral, the moral is just be honest.
Okay, so I'm going to take back what I said before. I think this is the best story out of the bunch. And if I had to recommend one story from this bunch, it would be this one. And despite how graphic the violence is, how grotesque it is, and just the morbid imagination of Garth Ennis, I think this one is actually the best told story. And the fact that, Paul, that you were laughing when you were describing this ending proves to me how good of a story it is.
I think so too. Like I said, you can just picture the girl coming in. The bunny is back in the cage, which I think is funny.
Adam, I totally agree. And sorry, what were you gonna say, Paul?
Adam, I mean, you might want to talk about this because the art. What was it? You liked the art? Which story did you like the art the best?
It was the previous story that I had the least amount of issues with the art.
Because this one, I think I enjoyed the art the most. Not just the art, but the color, the coloring. The coloring's very different from one page to another page to another page. So the coloring is very eye-catching and entertaining because of its variety, and the art style is just right, I think, for this tale. I mean, how would we describe the art style? Almost kind of impressionistic at times.
Yeah, but I just think that and again, because I don't really want to mess around with my screen, but the skill of this artist, I think, is much better. I mean, the figures are better, the page layout is better. Whoever this artist is, I'm assuming it's not the same one as the previous ones, but this guy is definitely the best one, I think. So yeah, Adam, what's your take on this story?
I feel like I'm going to achieve a new acronym, a new title of Debbie Downer, because I did not really care for this at all.
Wow. Really?
I'm going to say a few points here. One, in terms of the art style, I agree. I think the art style, I like the renditions. I like the figure work done here far more than the previous artist, although I do think the coloration mixed with the heavy inking in the previous story is what made it, for me, the most palpable of all the art in these stories. I don't really want to get too much into detail of it because I feel it's just going to be personal preferences at this point. But I just see this story as cruelty for cruelty's sake, shock for shock value. I don't really think there was too much clever or too much that's really taking place in the story that makes me go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's intriguing. It's basically like a raunchy joke that someone would tell at a bar, told in an 8-page comic, which is fine. I don't think it's necessarily, I'll put it this way, there's a place for this type of story. And I don't think it should not be there because it's,
Mm-hmm.
morally unsound to be able to tell a story like this. I don't believe in that sort of censorship. I just didn't really feel it connected with me that much. In the end, a person who's a dirtbag, who, by the way, one thing we failed during our recap is talking about how the commentary he made about how he wanted to make with the wife of this family, all these dismissive comments he made about other people in the neighborhood. Like, the guy's a real dick. It's like, there's no getting around that. But I don't think I feel any catharsis or justification despite the things he said or his actions or his thoughts with him killing himself at the end of the story. To me, that's edgelord stuff. That's someone saying, aren't you glad that this total asshole of a human being offed himself? No, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's just where my humor is, but I don't find catharsis in that. And I think that's where this story just didn't sit for me. Again, I get there's a place for these sort of narratives, and I think the overall thing is, like I said, it's a bar joke. I just don't think it's necessarily what I want to read as a comic.
You know what's funny is this brings to mind a certain realization I had recently. Is anyone here a fan of the movie Trainspotting?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, it's great.
I love Trainspotting. And so I also love Pulp Fiction. And they came out, I think, about a year apart. And when Pulp Fiction came out, I thought it was the greatest movie ever made. And when Trainspotting came out, I thought it was a close second. Now, over the years, that's changed. And I've added a lot of other movies to that list. But the one thing I realized just recently is that I think as time goes by, even though Trainspotting is about a group of heroin addicts, the vibe of those people and the vibe of the movie is more me. And the vibe of Pulp Fiction, even though I think it's an incredible movie, the one thing that was alienating about the movie the very first time I saw it, and has never changed, is that I don't think John Travolta blowing the guy's head off is particularly funny. Now I think it's mildly funny, but the first time I saw it, I was very put off by it. And it took me out of the film because of how hard everyone else was laughing. I was shocked, not in a good way. And even the two characters, Jules and Vincent, executing that guy took me out of the film because I thought I was just enjoying these guys joking around and making speeches and blah, blah, blah. And now they're killing this guy in cold blood. And so that took me out of the film. And and the reason I'm saying this is because I think what you're saying, Adam, is that you can understand how someone could enjoy this story on a technical level, but it's the character and what happens is so off-putting that you basically can't identify with the characters and you can't identify with anything that happens in it.
I would go one step beyond. And
Okay.
again, this is not casting aspersions about anyone who enjoys this particular story. But what I don't like is the character, the invisible character Garth Ennis is creating, which is the spectator. Because what he's doing is creating a spectator for us to be embodied by, looking at this, to get that catharsis of this character offing himself after these horrible actions, these horrible thoughts, after the series of misdeeds that culminate into this event. I don't like that character because I think what Ennis is doing, like most authors do, is they make an assumed kind of everyman audience, a person that they go, the audience has to feel this way because this is just how people feel. And I guess I just don't like that construct or that idea of what that audience is. Again, not to say that there can't be humor in this. I don't think anyone's malicious or evil for finding something like this funny. There is, like I said, I think it's a good bar joke. I just think maybe there's a difference between if someone just told me the sequence of events and I'm having a pint with somebody versus seeing the actual imagery of the decapitated dog and the eviscerated rabbit and a person having his lips wrapped around an exhaust tube. To me, I think that's why certain jokes work being told rather than being shown. And maybe it was I forget which Brooks it was. One of the Brooks. There's many Brooks comedians, but one of the Brooks said, there's a lot of stories that I will not show. I'll tell jokes, but I won't show them because to show them is not funny. To tell them is funny.
Yeah.
And that is what I walked away thinking about this. It's not an indictment of the type of narrative or even the fact that people can find this amusing. It's just, for me, it's just one of those personal things where I can hear the story, but to see it depicted, it neuters it of humor for me.
Gotcha. Anything else to add to that, Paul?
I think so.
All right, let's hear it.
I think Adam makes a very good point about some things are funnier told than shown.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very valid criticism of this particular story. Because if we just say how it is, like, well, the dog had already chewed up the rabbit before the family even went away, so now it's quite, and then the girl comes in and she sees the rabbit back in the cage, and you can kind of make it funny. It's definitely, as we've said, dark humor, right? So there's a couple of things that make me take a couple of retro steps here. One is, in previous podcast, we've covered what amounted to a Garth Ennis autobiographical story, somewhat autobiographical. Well, not really. You know what I mean? When he was in Ireland, Northern Ireland, during the Troubles as a child. So he grew up in a culture of violence. He grew up in a culture of people being dismembered and blown up and decapitated. Because, I used to know about this without living in Ireland. Things would happen in London, car bombs and this and that. So maybe that's influenced him a lot, that he grew up in a culture of violence. And when he wrote The Punisher is also full of, has a lot of dark humor. Other writers tried to do The Punisher in some kind of credible way, but it's just a boring character if you do it in a credible way. So Garth Ennis always did it with a tongue-in-cheek dark humor, and this is extremely tongue-in-cheek, extremely, not really meant to be taken literally. And I've said also in a previous podcast, one of my favorite Punisher war journals by Garth Ennis features the mob boss Ma Nucci. And she's this little woman, poker face, bellowing out orders and assassinations and all kinds of stuff. But after a tangle with the Punisher, she ends up quadriplegic. But there she is, next issue, in the wheelchair, no arms, no legs, but that's not stopping her at all. She's just as ferocious as before, just as domineering as before. So Garth Ennis, culture of violence, that's his culture, unfortunately. And I think he maybe deals with it in some way, sometimes seriously, and other times with dark humor. And when you do it with dark humor, like Adam said, maybe better told than shown, like in this case. But then again, in The Punisher, it's shown, and it's very good. So that leaves me a little bit confused.
Which is fine.
I just want to bring up one thing related to this, because I've debated this myself. Why do I like Hitman? Why do I like The Punisher when Ennis is writing this? But I tend not to really like a lot of his creator-owned properties. And I think, I don't know if it has something to do with maybe Marvel or DC having a little bit more of a hold, saying, don't go that far. I know he was given a lot of leeway for those respective titles, but there was still a censoring administrative element to being part of those two big imprints. And I've always wondered, I'm not an advocate for censorship, so don't misconstrue me, but sometimes when you do have certain limitations overhead, I think that sometimes brings out stronger work from particular writers. And I'm just struggling to think of any other reason why I find Hitman or Punisher by Ennis so engaging when I don't really feel that resonance with any of his other works. It's just a thought. Maybe something we'll explore later on, but it's just something I thought about.
I'm with you on that.
In The Punisher, Adam, every character is so distinctive. whether
Yes.
it's the people who live around him, Slacker Dave, or for example, Mr. Bumpers, and the Detective Soap. Poor guy, Detective Soap. It's such a great name for him, and all the horrible situations he puts him in. And the Punisher himself is just very, very distinctive. It's a wonderful series.
Well, if we keep this podcast going long enough, eventually we'll get to Garth Ennis' Punisher, and I am a big fan as well, so I'm looking forward to it. But on that note, we're gonna have to wrap up this episode. We'd love to keep talking, but we are out of Suburban Hell Stories. I hope that our audience will forgive us because we still have a few more comics to review by a certain author that Paul is not a fan of, and that's Neil Gaiman. And we're gonna do Black Orchid next episode. Everyone remembers Black Orchid, right?
I bought Black Orchid graphic novel many in the 80s.
Sure, yeah,
80s.
88, 89 around there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is that what you're referring to, or is there more?
Yeah, the 4-issue series. Yep.
I traded it in.
Well, that's a good sign. So
I guess we can't talk about it then.
yeah,
Sorry.
we can't talk about it. No, but be sure to join us next week or next episode 2 weeks from now, and every 2 weeks after that for more UK CORRAL. We review every single good comic by a UK writer ever written.
and one's by Ennis as well.
That's right. Oh, all right. Okay, so there you go. Until the next time, see you later.